final speaker of today, and then, as I say, hopefully we'll have time to bring all of our speakers back for a questions session. He is Chad Sakac, who is the President of Global Systems Engineering, EMC. He is a renowned blogger and industry visionary. I'm absolutely intrigued by the name of his presentation, which has to be the perfect title to end the day on, which is WTH, which is the polite version of the other one, you know what I mean. So he's going to lead us through what the hell. Please welcome Chad Sakac.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. How's everyone doing? Good? Good. It is great to be here. I want to just quickly say something that's very important to me. I'm a Canadian. So just note, you know, it's like, as I've discovered in my day here where I've been in Glasgow and Edinburgh, apparently people are very sensitive about being in these two different places. It's interesting. They're separated by such small distances, but people are so passionate. You know, I think it's important for every Canadian to identify themselves as Canadian within 30 seconds or less, so I'm glad I got that right out of the gate. And I'm going to make some jokes that I couldn't do if I was in the US, so I hope that you guys will laugh, because after this I'm going to have to shelve them when I go back. But my role at EMC, I lead all of the SEs. So anyone who in the field is a nerd like me, passionate about the intersection of technology and customers. I do a blog called Virtual Geek, so if you just Google Virtual Geek, hello, that's me. And you can follow me on Twitter at SAKACC. I'm very friendly. If you want to continue the dialogue, we can do it over champagne later. If you think of something afterwards, just follow me and hit me with a DM. I'll happily answer. So the question that I put up here is, I wanted to take this in a way that was a little bit different. And again, there's always hazard in this, so I hope it goes well. You can tell me. But it's really about leading through periods of immense change. So this is a human story as much as a technology story. And I don't know if you have the same sense that I do, but the rate of technology change that is occurring is accelerating, I think, past the ability of any human to be able to deal with it. Like, I get the sense of like my own brains leaking out of my ears every single day. And it's fun and it's exciting, but it can also be very, very freaky. So first things first, you know, I'd be remiss if I didn't say thank you. So thank you for being here, and thank you for giving your time to both myself and to the rest of the speakers, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is, where does disruption start? Because that's the beginning of understanding kind of what's going on. People think that it's companies like IBM or EMC or VMware or Google, and that's not actually correct in my opinion. In my opinion, it starts actually with individuals. So wherever I've always found whenever I visit a customer that there's usually one dude or one gal who's just like, I've got a crazy idea and I want to go off and do it. And they're separate a little bit from the group. By definition, that makes them a little weird and a little bit of an outsider relative to the mainstream. They come up with an innovation. That can be at a customer, but sometimes it can be within a company as well. I'll tell you where innovation doesn't start. It doesn't start in standards bodies, right? Even on things that are very innovative. So like the Apache Hadoop project, which has a huge governance body, or things like Mesos and Kubernetes and weird new words that we all hear, they actually started with someone who was doing that as like either a PhD thesis or they were doing it inside a company. But once it became like into a governance body, the governance body provides no incremental innovation and disruption. This is a picture of the vendor ecosystem. You know, most people think of the vendor ecosystem as that's them in kind of the gray, and then there's, you know, somebody with the dollars, that's the sales rep. The SE is the person standing right beside him, driving a slightly less nice car than the sales rep. But the thing is that those aren't really the face of the vendor innovation and disruption ecosystem. It's always some person that you never see that is often behind the scenes. But again, notice an interesting thing. It's an individual. And it's true no matter how big the company is. That's the other interesting thing. Innovation is not a function of size in any way, shape, or form. So there is, however, a magic that does occur when these three little Venn diagrams kind of come together. Not completely, but a little bit. And so that's kind of the first thing that I would just say. Disruption starts with innovation, but innovation starts with individuals, a singular human, which is a magical little thing. The role of standards bodies and vendors is amplification, if anything, right? Which is kind of encouraging because that means innovation can come from any source, anytime. Now, the second thing is what characterizes this disruption and innovation. How do you know it when you see it? So this is an imaginary picture of the proto-moon smashing into the proto-Earth, right? Which would have been a very bad day, right? So small Mars-sized object crashing in, completely liquefying the planet, you know, magma everywhere. And then eventually what's interesting is the whole Earth-Moon system was created out of this early solar system completely random event. So the fact that we all exist as humans and are here in this room now, and I get to visit the delightful country and meet many of you over dinner tonight, is a function of this random catastrophic event, right? Again, there's an analogy where you can think of there's a lot of catastrophic disruption that occurs and it's terrifying. That's actually the second thing. This is the facial expression of humans when dealing with massive disruption. So total, utter fear, right? Like freaking out, incapacitating fear, right? So second observation about disruption and innovation is it's characterized by just absolutely catastrophic, cataclysmic change and fear. So when you see those things, get excited, right? When you feel that way, get excited because it's also the thing that creates boundless new opportunities. So this is an interesting characteristic because as humans, our natural instinct is that when we feel afraid, we kind of close down. We put our shields up. And that's actually an evolutionary reptilian trait that no longer serves us particularly well. Like, I'm a little freaked out by Watson, right? Like, that's a little scary. I mean, have people not seen the Terminator movies? You know, there's actually a government program in the US that they officially called Skynet. You know, like, somebody should really stop that, right? But the reality is that any fear that you feel, you shouldn't feel. That idea that, hey, roles are going to be disrupted all over the place, unless you're a priest. Any priests in the room? That shouldn't freak you out. And I think that was one of the important messages that you just heard. Now, the next question is disruption always good? So I remember this day, and I was like, I do not get it. It's a phone, an MP3 player, and an internet browser. And you remember how Steve Jobs, if you watch that, he basically repeated it like 3 times. And there was a lot of people going like, what the H or what the F, you know, depending on your degree of politeness, I don't get it, right? That was 2007, which, I don't know about you, that seems like it was like a heartbeat ago, right? So this is clearly a positive disruption. You know, it created a whole new ecosystem. It created a whole new way of connecting humans. Anytime, my role means I travel around the globe. It's amazing. I use Google Translate all the time, which again uses a lot of the analytics engines that we're describing that power all these sorts of innovations to do some really, really, really cool stuff, right? And I can do that on my mobile phone, which created an ecosystem too, an economic boom. Who loves Lego? Raise your hand. Audience interaction. Everybody loves Lego, right? So Lego is a customer. This is one of the coolest customer visits I ever did. It's like this tiny little town in Denmark called Billund. And when you land at the airport looks like the Lego airport, right? And then you drive down the street and you pass like a fire station and it looks like the Lego fire station. And actually, for real, I'm not kidding, I stayed in a hotel, and it was a Lego hotel, and the furniture was made out of Lego. And the table was filled with Lego bits, so you could just run your hands through it, and like it brought back my inner child, right? The interesting thing is that this was a massive disruption unto itself. This guy basically who started Lego, it's still a private company, he basically had the insight of using this new mechanical process to create bricks that you could actually build permanent structures, because originally he would build them out of wood, like, you know, traditional wooden blocks, right? And if you can ever go and visit Billund, take your kids, because they had the best Christmas ever, because the company store has Lego at 1/5 the street price. It's quite an awesome visit. I'd highly encourage it. Now, these are all good disruptions. The interesting thing is that good disruptions continue. Minecraft is disrupting Lego. This is very disturbing to me. As someone who grew up with Lego, I've got 2 young daughters who I love tremendously, and they like playing with Lego, but they constantly play with Minecraft. And it was so weird to me, like they watch YouTube videos of other people playing Minecraft. Anyone here have kids that, like, do they, I don't get it, right? But yet what I started to realize is that it's a very creative process, and they stopped playing with Lego, and they're now building universes. When they hang out, they all play on their mobile devices, and they build a little world of their own in their imagination out of logical bricks. Now, this is freaking Lego out. Lego, because this is like a different form of Lego creative play, right? So Lego is now creating their own Minecraft competitor that when you buy the Lego set, you get the virtual ability to create that Lego set in the virtual world. So this is both a positive disruption to world and my kids, I think, I hope, but it's a negative disruption to Lego. And it'll be interesting to see how that goes. Does anyone recognize this dude? Anyone? I see some hands going up. Anyone? So who is he? Rob Ford, the proud mayor of Toronto, my home city. This guy, if you don't know who he is, our mayor for many moons, thankfully he's now been replaced. He was an unabashed cocaine user. And his excuse was, I only do it when I'm drunk. So now, not only that, but he was a terrible mayor. The whole city, it's a great city, I'd encourage you to visit. Like, it went to the toilet for about 6 years while he was the mayor. I can't believe this happened, and I can't believe it's going to happen again. Right? It's unbelievable. Like, so these are disruptive events unto themselves, right? And man, he didn't do very well in the debate yesterday, and for my American brothers and sisters, I'm like, please, please gain your senses. Regardless of where you fit on the political spectrum, he is an idiot. You know what I mean? Like, it freaks me out thinking as a citizen of the globe of this guy being the president of the United States. But it would be a disruptive event, that's for sure, right? The key thing in all of these, whether they're positive or negative, is they're a fork in the road. You can go left, you can go right, you can't go straight. If you were in the block business and Lego does their thing, you better go left or right. But your existing business is going to get fundamentally disrupted, right? So don't think of disruption inherently as intrinsically good or bad. Just recognize that it's a moment. Whatever you do, whatever industry you're in, as you face a disruption, you must turn left or right. The very ironic thing is, again, in human psyche, we're used to whatever we did successfully to get us to the moment that we are in the present, that we tend to do the same thing. In normal, steady state, low change environments, that's a winning strategy. The problem is that during periods of massive disruptive change and innovation, going straight is actually the worst strategy. You'd almost be better off, in fact, you would be better off to randomly do a crazy Ivan to the left or to the right, as opposed to just continuing to plow on. Very, very difficult, by the way, because humans have inertia. You put 10 humans together, they have a lot of inertia. You put 1,000 humans together, or 10,000, or 100,000 in an enterprise, or millions in a country, and their collective inertia is enormous. And it requires great courage to go left or right. So can we characterize the technology disruption that we're in, as we speak? I think that you can. So we sense it in a million ways. You can sense it in things like cognitive logic and analytics tools that can predict what you're going to do. You can see it in Nest being acquired by Google for $3.2 billion. They did not buy a thermostat company for $3.2 billion. Why did they spend that kind of money? It's because the information that they're gathering about your behavior through the thermostat is worth billions of dollars, right? So sharing of information is part of the social networks, wearables, Internet of Things technologies, how those then apply. Those are all symptoms, right? The drone thing is fascinating. It's freaky, but it's fascinating, right? So these are all, I would describe as symptoms. The causes are fundamental disruptive tech that is being innovated by individuals first and foremost, no company, right? So obviously social media, new cloud models. To me, big data and Internet of Things are just different scales of the same idea. Everyone's inventing new buzzwords constantly to create new hype cycles of given ideas, but the idea of if you have a mass of data, you can do some incredible things. I'm going to try a crazy, high-risk live demo myself. Everybody pull out your phone. Okay? Open up a browser and type in the following URL. tilt.cfapps, apps.io. What you should see is something like this. Do you see it? tilt.cfapps.io. Now, if you really want to push the limit a little bit, hit the settings button and say enable GPS data. Is anyone not working, or is everybody working? Good. Anyone not working? So as you move your phone around, you're going to see that it's going to change this 3D image. I am now, sorry to tell you, gathering information from all of your phones, right? And you'll notice the only time you got prompted to say okay to something was when the location tracking was on, right? That's a little freaky, you know what I mean? Like if you think about it a little bit. People don't think about it when you use Google Maps or Apple Maps. How does it know what the traffic patterns are? Is it because they've got people like watching? No, it's because they're gathering information statistically from phones to see how they're moving along the roadways, right? By the way, this thing here, it's kind of neat. Again, it highlights this innovation is powered by individuals. It was an SE in Seattle who was really frustrated as he was talking about Arduino devices and how they could be used in manufacturing and supply chain and Internet of Things data. And the customer's like, I don't get it. So he's like, you know what? I'm going to build an Internet of Things thing. And he went off, and for $50 in a public cloud, he went off and he built this application, learned how to develop, did his coding. It then goes into a giant Hadoop cluster where we can visualize all the data. Like if I said someone in the room randomly wiggle your phone, I'm not going to do it now, I could eventually just identify you, right? If we said someone randomly, I'll close my eyes, wiggle your phone furiously, right? We could gather the informatics from the device. But again, there's some weird idea in that Internet of Things idea that says the information is all just out there, right? A fascinating thing, again, is this data set of Twitter is wide open. You can literally query the Twitter API, which is a RESTful API, and you can do any analytics that you want on the entire Twitter stream. You can gather all the pictures that you want. We actually did a demonstration at EMC World where we built a carousel and we asked people to send out photos and then we put it up on the big screen. It was very scary because basically we didn't realize until after the demo that we weren't filtering on not safe for work content, right? And I was showing someone the demo afterwards, after we did it like on stage in front of 15,000 people, and a not so good picture came up, and I realized I almost just did that by accident on stage in front of 15,000 people. Dodged a bullet. Phew. But the point is that all of these things represent fundamental root cause of disruption that we're in right now. They're not just buzzwords, they are very, very real and they're foundational. Now the effect, so if you've got symptom and cause, what's the effect? The effect is a new way of developing applications, which is the DevOps culture and mantra, a continuous development model. That's one effect that changes how people write code against this model. Another part is actually the development methodology that they use. Now again, I've been visiting lots of customers here in Scotland over today and in the UK over the last few days. And then next week is Sweden and France and Germany. The amazing thing is like as I travel, they're all like, yeah, I got to get me some of those DevOps. Can I have 5 of those? And it's like, it's not something you can buy or do. And you're like, are your developers developing in this? No, they're not. They're putting it on a traditional database, and we go through a development process that takes 12 to 18 months to develop an app. But it sounds cool, right? Everyone kind of gets that in the zeitgeist, there's this new way of doing things. And it comes down to applications that are not developed as monoliths, but instead are built off of tiny little microservices, some of which you may not even own. So for example, when I call that Twitter API feed, or we use the Watson RESTful API examples that you saw earlier, you're in effect using it as a microservice that you can then package up into other services that you then construct. Many of the applications that we consider now to be our new social media applications are constructed this way. And the fascinating thing is that they look chaotic. And you look at it and go, how could that possibly be stable compared with my Oracle ERP app that I've put on top of this Oracle database and deep, rich infrastructure? And the answer is that they're actually more stable because they are chaotic. But they're chaotic in small, tiny little parts. As long as you stay compliant with the APIs, you're safe and protected. It's an interesting idea. This is changing and disrupting the way that people build infrastructure, with containerization and container and cluster managers becoming a really important early part of what's going on in the PaaS and in the SaaS world. So looking at, when I interact with customers within enterprise, they're like, this is a weird new world, but we know it's important. But when you go and you visit a SaaS startup, they're like, no, this isn't some future state, this is our now. There's a great quote that basically said, the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed, right? It is by geography, by country, by industry, and by individual. And, this means that there's disruptions fundamentally to all sorts of ecosystems. This is terrifying for industry incumbents, every industry incumbent. But it's terrifying for EMC. What does this mean? It means that traditional storage models are disrupted by this new architectural model. What does it mean for VMware? It means that, things like Spring, which is an ecosystem of applications built on microservices, very modeled on the Netflix OSS model, which is one example of one of these microservice-based applications. It changes the way that people abstract infrastructure. How many of you are VMware customers, just out of curiosity? Show of hands. EMC customers, by the way, just out of curiosity? Hey, thanks. Many of you are. In fact, I guarantee that all of you have used one of the clouds that we power in the last hour. You didn't know it because it's way behind the scenes, right? But all of these things are disrupting massive ecosystems. Oracle, Cisco, EMC, IBM, Microsoft. You can see how Microsoft is changing the way that they're building and operating things. A fascinating thing for me is I always wanted Office for the iPad, right? Like I really want for years. And then Steve Ballmer gets replaced by Satya Nadella, and 6 days later, Office for the iPad appears. Right? Did they develop it in 6 days? Probably not. But there was a major strategic disruptive event where they said we can no longer depend on the client device and operating system and Office ecosystem driving the Windows server and app ecosystem, which then drives that whole economic value chain, right? So Satya Nadella turned it on its head and said, we're going to operate in an open ecosystem, which means we should embrace iPads with Office, right? You can imagine that's one of those examples of turn left or right. Can you imagine the inertia that he had to fight and the willpower that it takes as a leader to make those sorts of shifts? Massive risk too. But what's a bigger risk? Try to keep going straight, right? It's a perfect example. So the cure to this big disruption that in our mind is to focus at the application layer, right? Focus on the user, focus on the client, no matter what your business is. That the world of annoying, which is like the platform layer, just pick your standards and run. And the world of completely boring, which is the infrastructure as a service layer, get out of that business, either by using a public cloud, whether it's ours or somebody else's, or using a private cloud, and we think it's actually this hybrid model is the one that wins. It's a little bit of both. There's always going to be reasons why you'll want to use an elastic public cloud. There's always going to be reasons why certain workloads will want to be on premise. I think, frankly, people, human beings, no matter where I travel, no matter what language they speak, no matter what culture, they always want to Donald Trump the answers. They want the answers to be like, well, I'll build a wall, then that will keep the immigrants out. Before going, is immigration a problem? Or is it actually good? You know, well, that requires nuance and some sophistication in your thinking, right? It's really easy to go, no, it's all going to be private cloud. No, it's all going to be public. And it makes fights fun, right? But it's kind of stupid, right? The answer is always a degree of nuance, you know, in this world. Our view is, regardless of whether it's public or private, you need to kind of try to say, what business am I in and what business am I not in? Like, what is important and what is not? If it's a commodity, treat it like a commodity. Assess it like a boring commodity and consume it that way, right? Ultimately, it's the apps, the business, and the client that's the most important thing, along with analytics and insight. Now, the last part of this discussion, and I want to try to hopefully give you guys some time back. I don't know whether I'm running over schedule or not. Hopefully this is interesting. Is it interesting? This is a little bit strange. I kind of pulled an audible on the discussion to have today. The most interesting thing to me about all of this stuff is actually the individual. So I'm a proud nerd. Who else here in the room is a nerd with me? Come on, nerds of the world, unite. You know, we should be proud, right? And I'm glad you are. I'll buy you around later. The interesting thing is that as individuals, we're also simultaneously leaders. So I lead a team of about 4,000 of my fellow nerd brothers and sisters around the globe. So my job fundamentally is to try to lead them through change. I'm always surprised, however, in this job, how much leadership does not actually flow from me downwards, but instead is horizontal or upwards. So the interesting thing that as I learn about more and more, the hierarchical organizational model is complete hogwash at this point. The power of an individual is amplified through technology, through social media. The bulk of the power doesn't come from my title. It actually comes from my blog, which is weird, right? And therefore, if someone else is doing something cool, they get influenced through that regardless of their title and job. And I think that's kind of democratizing and interesting. Therefore, the question of like, what does all of this stuff I've been talking about mean for individuals as humans is a very important question. So this is a guy who none of you know. His name's Scott Lowe. He used to be like a wrench turner focused on virtualization. His whole career was focused on traditional enterprise applications, and all of a sudden he decided, you know what, I'm going to hit a fork in the road, and I'm going to make a crazy Ivan and go left or right. And he said, I'm going to radically focus on the open source domain and these new application stacks. The interesting thing is that he was driven to do that, as many technologists who are curious, by curiosity. He felt like he was kind of getting stale, but he was slightly ahead of the curve, and all of a sudden his career skyrocketed. Another interesting example, had he continued to go straight, he would have been great. Like, my blog is like number 8 in this cloud infrastructure world intersection. His was like number 2, so he would have been perfectly justified in kind of trundling along, but he would have dropped off radically because he was very focused on classic virtualization, and then the world started to move a little bit towards new application stacks, open source, the Hadoop ecosystem, et cetera, et cetera. So he made this change, and it accelerated his career. It's also radically affecting industries, right? So open source projects fundamentally mess with traditional ecosystems, but in an incredibly positively disruptive way. These are 2 examples, but they're legion, right? OpenStack, has been disrupting the world of IaaS for some time. And you can think of Open Daylight affecting and disrupting the world of SDN and networking. You can think of the Apache Hadoop ecosystem and projects disrupting the world of analytics. It goes on and on and on and on. So examples here, again, of disruptions. They create innovation mechanics within the vendor ecosystem. So Cisco's historical primary mechanism for innovation behind all of those companies, Crescendo basically created the Catalyst switch family. That was an acquisition that at its root had 4 humans. If this sounds like a crazy, any Cisco employees here? If it doesn't matter, you can Google this so you can find out, right? 4 humans, Mario, Prem, Luca, Sony. They're called the MPLS team, Mario, Prem, Luca, Sony. MPLS network joke, anyone? No? I'm just dying up here, like throw me a bone. They basically were 4 humans that led that first startup that Cisco acquired. Eventually Cisco spun them out because they said, okay, you want to do something cool, and they created a company called Andiamo. Mario and Luca are both Italian, so Andiamo means go faster. That became the MDS business because they spun them back in. Nuova Systems became Project California, which became the UCS business for Cisco. Again, amazing. 4 humans. Like, what an example of individuals, creating disruption and innovation. And then the last and most recent example was Insieme, which means altogether, right? Again, that's one mechanism that Cisco uses for innovation that I think is interesting because, again, it echoes this idea that small numbers of people can actually do very interesting things, right? VMware acquired a company called Nicira that became the basis of NSX. That was started by one dude, Martin Casado, who was doing it as a Stanford thesis project. And now it's, a huge, many hundreds of millions of dollars worth of business that's radically disrupting this networking ecosystem. Again, one human. And now it wasn't just him, but he also then created and built a team around him, right? In the land of storage, which is the other part of the ecosystem, tons of change going on. Flash is disrupting the industry. Software-defined storage models are disrupting the industry. Tons going on. What I'm finding is that individuals can, unfortunately, dinosaur up a little, right? So again, you remember that planetoid crashing picture and that instinct to go, I'm going to stop, can be bad. And for dinosaurs, that's an extinction level event. It can be that for, individuals' careers as well. The worst posture is this dinosaur, right, where you actively attack the disruptive thing that's coming at you, right? So again, if you find yourself in any given moment going, this is really scary, I don't really like this, I'm going to fight it, remember this picture because you're the dinosaur on the right. You don't want to be that one, right? Another great story about an individual, this is a guy who I hired about 10 years ago. He was like a IT dude in a small-sized company. And he was really smart and creative, like had none of the job skills for the job that we needed, but you could just see like an incredible spark and light and creative mind in the guy. We're like, hire for type rather than hire for resumes. So we're like, Nick Weaver, you should look him up. He's an awesome dude. He comes on board. Very rapidly, he becomes a killer SE. And I'm like, I am not going to be able to keep this guy in an SE role, so I'm going to send him to the wild. He went over to VMware. He helped build vCloud Air. He basically created an open source project that became part of Puppet. It was called Project Razor, which was a really cool low-level provisioning tool and system. And then Intel basically went, I want you, and he's now leading Intel's SDI initiatives, which are large-scale, rack-scale, hyperscale deployments of infrastructure tools and systems. And that's been like a 5-year journey for this guy, right? The one thing that was characteristic was he was always unafraid to do something cool and interesting, right? Really interesting now to just see his career kind of continue to grow and grow and grow, and it's an awesome thing to watch. Latest thing was Project Zombie, which is much better than it sounds. In our industry, the thing that is just crazy for us is increasingly our customer is not you. So this is a single customer buying something from EMC. This is one order, right? That 85 petabytes of stuff, right? That's in all of those boxes, and you can see those two dudes who were like, this is cray-cray, and someone take a selfie, right? Is one order of stuff. This is not going to an enterprise. It's going to one of the hyperscale cloud folks. Increasingly, our customer is indirectly the customer. And the thing that's fascinating is if you imagine 20,000 spindles, that's really, really big. That's a lot. Our biggest single customer grows at 1.5 exabytes a quarter. 1.5 exabytes, hard to visualize. Imagine 500 cabinets filled to the gills, rolling in every month, right? This is a world that is so enormous, and by the way, it is not the DoD, it's not, the Snowden NSA thing, it's a commercial offer. Those NSA things are even bigger and scarier, right? But these are totally different, by the way, economic constructs. Sometimes it's hardware, sometimes it's software only, and you can imagine that there are people within our company that are freaked the hell out by this, because it's a very different model than, the model in the past. Again, I'm not trying to put my IBM friend and colleague on the spot, but within IBM, I can only imagine that they're doing great stuff with Cloud Foundry with us, so Bluemix, great stuff there, SoftLayer, public cloud, but then there's got to be people within the IBM global services business that are like kind of freaked out by those things because they're opposing ideas, and human beings freak out when change is all around them, right? Again, it's no different than EMC. I'm not trying to put IBM on the spot. This is the nature of disruption. By the way, one thing I admire about IBM a great deal, they're one of the only tech companies that has gone through that crazy wave of disruption and disrupted themselves 3 or 4 times, right? Very interesting thing, and it's an interesting business case of like, how do you adapt through cultural periods of change? So, I'll skip that, and we'll get to the punchline. It's important to understand how you disrupt yourself. Now, at the company level, the way that we do it is pretty simple. Every January, we build a budget. The budget has a bunch of money to run the company. We always squirrel off 2 piles of money to do innovation, right? The run the company part is the big blue part. Half of the money that we spend on innovation, we do organically, meaning it's R&D, it develops new funky products and cool stuff like that. But half of the funding we put into universities, into venture funding, and into acquisitions. And the interesting rule of thumb in high-tech land is $1 that you spend on your own internal R&D in a space where you are the leader. So, you're doing more R&D than anyone else. There's 8 times more dollars, so there's $8 that is being spent inside the open ecosystem. Very, very, what does that mean? It means if you assume the average engineer that you have is as good as one of the other external engineers, there will be 8 times more external innovation than there will be internal, which means you cannot out-innovate the outside world. So the way that you participate in that ecosystem, we do it, all great high-tech companies do it, is you have to invest in this vehicle, whether it's Silicon Valley, whether it's Israel, whether it's MIT. The innovation hubs exist all around the world, including, in Scotland here, I visited several, right? Cool stuff. Now, if you summarize our view, and then I want to close on this idea of like, what does it mean for perhaps you, is you do not want to be disrupted to death. The business imperatives that then derive from that, number one, is you have to go on the offensive. No one ever wins any sport by playing a defensive game. So in any activity in life, if I think, I'm trying to think of an analogy here. If I think my wife, there's no way I would have managed to convince her to marry me playing a defensive game. She had to play a defensive game because I was like constantly asking her out, right? But you can think of own examples in your life. You must play an offensive game. We think that fundamentally the most important part of that is to innovate in the application and the analytics space. There's great tools to do that from us and from others. But whatever you do, whatever industry you're in, don't be defensive. Play offense. The second thing invariably is you have to basically take cost and squeeze it out of your business so that you can actually innovate on the other side. This equation is difficult to manage because inherently this thing on the side here is actually the thing that powers your business. So it's very counterintuitive that you're squeezing the thing that powers whatever you're doing. We think the way to do that is to deploy a well-run hybrid cloud and not muck around with infrastructure, right? Whether you believe that ours is the best or somebody else is the best, pick, choose, and move the hell on. We think that the third imperative is around security and risk. And I think the world is waking up now to how crazy this is. And fundamentally, security and risk historically has been build a moat, build a castle like the glorious castle that I saw, right? Build a Maginot Line. How'd that go, right? Not so hot, right? Firewalls and perimeter security is important, but no defense in depth will ever work. The bad guys are always on the inside, which means that fundamentally it's a big data and analytics problem. Again, lots and lots of stuff going on here. It's a terrifying world, but the answer is the same tools that are being used to attack, which is analytics and very fast new application development. We're a weird conglomerate of companies. So like if I asked you to close your eyes and say what you visualize when you visualize EMC, it would probably be a storage thing. But EMC is this conglomerate of VMware, EMC, Pivotal, and RSA, and that allows us to attack these different problems in an interesting set of ways. Now, what should you do? Who the hell am I to tell you what you should do? I'll tell you what I do, and if it's useful, feel free to steal it. The first thing is to recognize that the rate of collapse of leaders is faster than ever. In other words, if you're a smaller entity, feel excited because you have speed on your side. The giants, EMC, IBM, other speakers, ironically, our size is no longer an effective weapon. The duration of time that a leader stays the leader has shrunk so dramatically over the last 70 years that this statement, 89% from the Fortune 500 from 1955 don't exist today. If you apply it and go over the last 10 years, how many of the Fortune 500 are still in the Fortune 500? It's less than half. Like the rate of change of that is freaky. But again, that creates opportunity for disruption for everybody. The second thing that I think is fascinating is leading through disruptive time is fundamentally about heart and mind in a very interesting way. Peter Drucker has this great quote that basically says culture, I'll mangle it, and I'll say, look, eats strategy for breakfast. So when someone says, well, we've got a brilliant strategy, if you've got a brilliant strategy, that is not enough, right? And it creams technology and products. So the interesting thing is, how do you create a culture? The way that you create a culture is by being very true and authentic to your own culture. And through that, you actually can infect others. You cannot fake that. Like, it cannot be faked. And increasingly, it needs to be kind of public and out there and very real, emotional. And you know, people go, well, it's business, it's not emotional. Come on, humans are ridiculously emotional. Culture is inherently an emotional thing. And therefore, you know, I would just suggest that leading through periods of huge disruption and innovation requires an incredible amount of genuine authenticity, which is heart, as well as, obviously, intellectual capacity. Sometimes people ask me, you know, Chad, what is your formula? And this is the formula. Of course, there is no formula. What is my formula is much more simple than this. The first part is the expression on this dude's face. So the guy on the bottom, like clearly that's his first skydive, and he is fearless. He's having the time of his life. The guy who's above him, it's kind of like, it looks like he's like watching his watch and on a phone call. I'm presuming that's not what he's doing. But fearlessness is a critical component no matter what your job, what your industry is. You can actually get joy out of the fear that you get. This is an ironic little trick. So I'm like, when I feel that instinct in my gut, which is a subconscious thing that says, I'm afraid of blank, whatever the blank may be, I use the noggin to override my gut and use my heart, which is to charge towards the thing I'm afraid of. Because this reptilian thing that causes fear of change, which is a negative characteristic, increasingly during periods of very disruptive change, is actually like an indicator. Go there, whatever there is. Does that make sense? So when you feel it, and you know it when you feel it, right? Go, okay, how do I charge towards it? I told that analogy when I was recently in Australia, and they're like, Chad, you know in our country, if you do that towards many of our animals, they will kill you. And I said, check, got it. So charge towards your fear with a sharp, pointy stick, right? Whatever your pointy stick is, you know, and poke it just to be safe. But don't let it make you turn into a dinosaur. The second thing that I think is important is passion. Have you ever seen the power of somebody who's passionate about a topic? If you combine passion with fearlessness, as long as it's not accompanied by idiocy, right? You've got an ability to charge through disruption and be that source of innovation and that source of disruption in whatever you're doing. Again, this can apply, I think, you know, in general, anywhere. So, again, wrapping up, because I've always found that the panel part is perhaps the most valuable, where you can ask whatever's on your mind. And I know that this has been a little all over the map. Hopefully it was interesting. Takeaways. You know, disruption is inevitable. It is all going to start with individuals. So that could start with you, whatever you're doing. And I'm sure many of you are already doing it. So it's not a challenge to you. You're already down that path. If you're not, the question is, what do you want to do that is innovative and disruptive and fun? Number two, it's always going to be filled with intrinsic change and fear and opportunity. And you can use that fear as an indicator direction, whatever the topic may be. It's not intrinsically good or bad, you know. It creates uncertainty, which creates FUD and doubt, but it's also this incredible crucible of innovation, change, and awesome in all sorts of forms, which is fun and exciting. I think what I would encourage you, you know, and You can ask your own colleagues as you're talking tonight and we're talking at the table, whatever, you know, what is their mechanisms that they use to kind of push themselves out of their own comfort zone and disrupt themselves. And I think just, I guess, one kind of parting thought is this idea of passion and fearlessness can make times that would normally cause you to freak out to be ridiculously fun. And you remember how I started by saying it feels like our brains are leaking out of our ears, I can't keep track of everything that's going on? As long as you think about it through that framing, you can jump out of bed every day and be really excited by what's going on. So thank you very much, much appreciated, and shall we do the panel? Thank you.